The knock came at 2:17 a.m. I had lived in alone for a decade. I opened the door before thinking, because my brain recognized the rhythm before my memory caught up. My husband stood there first, thinner, older, with his hair gray at the temples. And behind him were my 2 children standing too still and too quiet. They were wearing the same coats they had worn the night I lost them 10 years ago. My husband said my name the same way he always had, flat and tired, like he had just come home from work. I slammed the door and locked it with shaking hands, because the ground truth of my life said they were buried, burned, and gone. The knocking resumed immediately, this time harder, faster, and closer together, like impatience. I backed away until my calves hit the couch, and I stayed there counting the seconds between each knock. I had rebuilt my life around silence and routines after the accident, and nothing like this had ever happened before. 10 years earlier, we had driven home during a storm after a family visit, and the road near the quarry had collapsed without warning. The car went down hard and rolled, and the fire came fast according to the people who found the wreck the next morning. I was not in the car because I had stayed behind with a fever, and that fact had defined every day since. The funerals were closed casket, and I never saw what was left of them. I sold the old house, moved towns, changed jobs, and learned how to breathe again 1 hour at a time. I kept no photos in frames and no clothes in closets, because memory was easier when it stayed abstract. The knocking stopped suddenly, and that silence was worse than the sound. I heard footsteps on the porch moving side to side, like someone pacing. A soft thud followed, then another, like something being set down against the door. I checked the time again, and it had only been 3 minutes since the first knock. I told myself this was exhaustion or a delayed break from grief. But the smell coming through the cracks under the door was familiar. It was the smell of wet wool, smoke, and cold metal. The same smell that clung to the items returned to me after the crash. My husband's voice came through the wood, asking me to stop being stubborn because the kids were tired. He said the road was worse than he expected, and the car had died a mile back. He said they needed to come inside now. I pressed my forehead against the door and told him he was dead, and my voice sounded small even to me. The answer came immediately, calm and irritated, saying that I always exaggerated and that this was not funny. A hand slid into the mail slot and knocked from the inside, and I screamed and kicked it shut. The porch light turned on without me touching the switch, and their shapes moved closer to the glass panels beside the door. I saw my daughter's face clearly then, older than the last time I saw her, with a scar along her chin that she did not have 10 years ago. My son stood behind her, holding something dark and rectangular that I could not identify. I knew then this was not memory replaying itself, because memory does not invent new details. I unlocked the door because because the alternative was waiting for them to break it down. The door swung open, and the cold air rushed in, carrying the same smell that had lived in my nightmares for years. They stepped inside without hesitation, like people who still believed the space belonged to them. My husband looked around the living room and commented on the new furniture, saying it did not suit me. The children stood near the wall watching me with an attention that felt practiced rather than emotional. I asked how they were standing in front of me when I had buried what was left of them. My husband said I buried what they found, not what they lost. He explained that the fire had not killed them, and that crawling out had been the easy part compared to everything after. They said they walked for hours before collapsing near a service road where a man picked them up and took them somewhere without asking questions. Time had passed differently for them, measured in places they were kept and names they were forced to use. They said the man sold identities and moved families like merchandise, and that compliance meant survival. I noticed then that my son's hands were scarred in a way that suggested work far too heavy for a child. My daughter avoided my eyes and stared at the hallway where their rooms used to be. I asked why they never tried to find me, and my husband said they did. But I had moved and changed everything too well. He said they finally tracked me through a credit trail linked to my mother's old address. The rectangular object my son held turned out to be a small locked case, and he set it gently on the table. My husband told me they needed to rest and that we would talk properly in the morning. I said they could not stay because nothing about this made sense. My husband's face hardened, and he reminded me that I had always chosen what was easiest for me. He accused me of replacing them with distance and silence. The children watched as if waiting for instruction. I noticed dirt embedded deep into the seams of their shoes, like it had been ground in over years. I asked where they had been living last, and my husband gave a city name that no longer existed under that name. He said borders change when you are not paying attention. I backed toward the kitchen, where I kept a drawer with a heavy tool inside. My daughter finally spoke and asked if her room was still blue. I said no, and she nodded like she expected that answer. The locked case on the table began to vibrate slightly, as if something inside was moving. My son told me not to open it because it was proof. My husband said the proof was necessary because I had always needed to see things for myself. He told me they were not leaving without answers, and that this house was the last place left to go. I grabbed the tool from the drawer and told them to get out. My husband laughed once and said I still reacted too late. He reached for the door behind him and locked it from the inside. My daughter stepped closer to me, and I saw that her pupils did not adjust to the light. The case stopped vibrating, and the room went very still. My husband said it was time to remember the part I played that night. He said the storm did not make me stay behind, and that the fever had passed hours earlier. He said I had argued with him on the phone, and told him to take the kids and leave if he was going to keep pushing me. He said I knew the road was unstable because there had been warnings posted all week. He said I hung up first. The locked case clicked open on its own, and inside were my old phone and a recorder wrapped in melted plastic. My husband pressed play on the recorder, and my own voice filled the room from 10 years ago, sharp and angry, telling him to drive carefully, but not to come back. I remembered then that I had thrown the phone across the room after that call and never looked for it again. My husband said the fire started when the fuel line ruptured, but the crash itself was avoidable. He said I chose pride over patience. The children stood behind him, listening without reacting. He said when they crawled away from the wreck, they waited for me to come, and I never did. He said they learned very quickly that waiting was dangerous. The man who took them in demanded work and obedience, and punishment was routine. My husband said he tried to keep them safe, and that safety required becoming someone else. He said they were finally free because the man died last winter. He said the only unfinished thing was me. I asked what they wanted now, and my husband said they wanted me to acknowledge what happened. He said he wanted me to say out loud that I sent them onto that road. I told him accidents do not work that way. He stepped closer and pointed to the recorder again. He said the truth does not disappear just because you refuse to look at it. The children moved in sync toward the hallway. My daughter said her room was smaller than she remembered. My son asked where the spare key was kept now. I realized then they knew the layout too well for people who had been gone only in memory. I tried to run for the back door, but my husband blocked me easily. He told me this was not revenge, and that revenge would have been quicker. He said this was closure. He instructed the children to bring what they came for. They returned carrying a box from the hall closet that I had not opened in years. Inside were items from the crash returned to me after the funerals. My husband said these were never supposed to come back to this house. He told me the night needed to end where it began. The children placed the box on the table and stepped away. My husband told me to sit. I did. He said I would not be alone anymore. He said families are not lost, they are abandoned. He opened the box and took out a charred seatbelt, a watch, and a fragment of fabric I recognized instantly. He said these were the things that burned while they did not. He said they carried them for 10 years, waiting for the right door to knock on. The children stood behind him, and for the first time, they looked tired rather than empty. My husband told me the truth was simple, and that I had complicated it by surviving. He said the house needed to reflect what happened. He took the tool from my hand without effort and placed it on the table. He said there would be no noise and no mess if I cooperated. I tried to speak, but my voice failed to form words. My husband instructed my son to turn off the lights one by one. Darkness filled the room in sections as each switch clicked. He said the fire had taught them how fast things end. My daughter took my hands and held them still. My husband said the world would make sense again after tonight. He said people like me do not get to move on without accounting for what they leave behind. I saw then that their clothes were not wet from rain, but stiff from something else entirely. My husband leaned close and told me I would finally be with them. The last light went out. I heard the recorder click on again, capturing everything. I understood then that this was not about belief or doubt. This was about making sure I did not get to rewrite the story again. The pressure on my arms increased as the room went silent. The next morning, the house burned down from an interior source, with no signs of forced entry. The recorder survived. It played a woman admitting she told her family to leave during a storm and never checked if they arrived. It played the sound of a door locking from the inside. It played until the end.